In 2017, Michael Knowles wrote the book Reasons to Vote for a Democrat, a Comprehensive Guide. The joke was, it was full of mostly blank pages, like foreign policy and nothing, and immigration and nothing. The book turned out to be a #1 bestseller, promoted by President Trump on Twitter. Well, now Knowles is out with his second book, and it includes actual writing. It's called Speechless: Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. Michael Knowles is a familiar face around here. He's host of the Michael Knowles Show on Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire. He hosts the Book Club on PragerU and co-hosts one of the top podcasts on the internet, The Verdict with Ted Cruz. Michael, welcome back to The Issue Is, and congrats on the book.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's great to be with you. And I do, by the way, I want to push back a little bit. You mentioned that I had that blank book that came out and it didn't have any words. I did not have any words, but I had a very extensive bibliography. And then in this book, which was a little more, I have the bibliography, but I've got the rest of the words too.
Is there part of you that's nervous that your book without words will sell better than your book with words?
There is no question. It's going to outsell it. It is my magnum opus. But I did think it would be really funny if my main book, you know, the first one that I became known for was without any words, if my second book would then be entirely about words and called Speechless. So
yes,
that's what we did.
And I got it here. You obviously got it there as well. The book's really great. I enjoyed reading it. Let me read from the beginning of the book, which kind of lays out some of your main point. It says, ironically, to your point, my second book spills more ink on the failures of the right, which through decades of incompetence has permitted political correctness to invert our culture. The more conservatives attempt to fight political correctness, the worse the problem seems to get. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of people expected this book to just be a polemic against the left, and there's plenty of that, I suppose. But I really set out to take the leftist thinkers who developed political correctness, what we now call wokeness or cancel culture. I wanted to take them seriously. I think a lot of people on the right flatter ourselves, and we say that we understand free speech and censorship so much better than the left does. I don't think that's true. I think that the left-wing thinkers who came up with PC are really brilliant people. I think they understand speech and censorship a lot better than we do. And I think, frankly, if conservatives want to push back against political correctness, which we have failed to do effectively for decades now, I think we need to take out our pen and paper and learn some lessons from the left.
What do you think are those key lessons?
Well, I think that we've fallen for a trap on the right. We believe that political correctness is a battle between free speech on the one hand and censorship on the other hand. And I don't really think it's that. I think it's more a battle of competing sets of standards. So political correctness, from its very beginning, set out as a system of withering criticism on the prevailing institutions and standards. It very simply sets out to knock down and to debunk, and you hear a lot about critical race theory these days, to criticize and deconstruct the prevailing standards. And so it sets up a trap for conservatives whereby if we give in and use the new leftist standards and all the new jargon, then obviously that advances political correctness. But even if we stand against PC on the grounds of, say, free speech absolutism, you know, we abandon standards entirely, that will advance the purpose of political correctness too, because either way, the traditional standards are abandoned. And because nature abhors a vacuum, the leftist stands are going to come in and take their place.
When you say inverted our culture, what specifically do you mean by that? What's like an example of you think, a cultural inversion because of language?
Well, for instance, in the 1950s, there was such a thing as cancel culture. I know we pretend that this is a brand new phenomenon. There was such a thing as cancel culture in the 1950s. In the 50s, we canceled communists. We canceled them in Hollywood. We canceled them in the federal government. Very famous trials like the trial of Alger Hiss. We canceled them throughout the culture. Today, we still cancel people, but we don't cancel communists, we cancel anti-communists. You would have gotten in trouble in the 50s for waving the hammer and sickle flag. Today you get in trouble for waving the American flag. And what is now encouraged is to protest the American flag as a symbol of oppression or racism or bigotry or something like that. I guess the clearest example of an inversion would be that today our language has been so thoroughly manipulated that we're not even able to call a man a man. Words and pronouns, most notably, are considered very politically controversial. We now have to ask people their pronouns, and we now have to pretend that if a man declares himself a woman, that he really is a woman. That is the new politically correct standard, and it's totally the opposite of the standard that most people have had for most of human history.
But, and there's no part of you that feels like these people were born this way, this is very painful for these people, that they're able to now express themselves fully, that they're much happier. When Caitlyn Jenner was on our show recently, she talked about the fact that she feels happier for the first time in her life because she's able to be who she is. There's no part of you that you know, feels compassion for that?
Well, I don't think he is being who he is. I mean, I guess this is even our disagreement over the pronouns. If someone is born this way, if that's the argument that we're going to advance, then Bruce Jenner was born as Bruce Jenner. Now, what he is saying now is, well, I've evolved deep down. I actually was always Caitlyn. And so that advances a theory of human nature that's called Gnostic dualism. The theory posits that our bodies have nothing to do with who we really are. That I might look like a man, I've got an Adam's apple, I got a deep voice, but deep down on a metaphysical level, I feel like I'm a woman, so therefore I really am a woman. And that's a theory that's prominent in transgenderism. There's a totally competing theory, which is materialism. And this is another theory also advocated by the left, which is that we are actually no more than our bodies. And our hopes and our dreams and our desires, they're just illusions. You know, they're just synapses firing in our brain. But really, we're just kind of meat puppets all walking around. And they're totally opposite arguments, but they seem to both be advanced at the same time. And they're both in opposition to what would be the traditional understanding of human nature, which is that we're body and soul together, and you know they're inseparable here on Earth. And so, of course, I advocate compassion for people who are sexually confused. This is a real phenomenon. Gender dysphoria is obviously real. We should be very compassionate. But I don't believe that it's compassionate to lie to people. I don't think it's compassionate to indulge delusion. I'm happy to hear that Caitlyn Jenner says that he is happier now. Statistics don't really bear this out. People who have undergone the so-called gender surgery, gender reassignment surgery, are statistically no less likely to be depressed or anxious or suicidal. It doesn't solve that problem. That's why Dr. Paul McHugh, who pioneered the surgery at Johns Hopkins, actually stopped performing it. And I think it's a really insidious premise that we're now being told by the left that lies are compassionate and the truth is cruel. I don't think that's true. I think lies are actually very disrespectful, and I think the truth will set you free.
So what do you think is the number one thing that Republicans, that the conservatives can do to start winning based off of what you're saying?
I think we need to advance a substantive political standard. I don't think it is enough to argue about the defense of free speech in the abstract or the freedom of belief in the abstract. I think that freedom of speech doesn't mean anything to people who don't have anything to say. And so I think we need to be able to say some things are true, some things are false, some things are good, some things are bad. Actually, on this topic of transgenderism, I guess there's a related example that shows a divide on the right. And that's this phenomenon of drag queen story hour, which it involves men dressing up as women, and in some cases twerking and engaging in sexual dances for little kids, toddlers, at the public library or even in schools. And there are the squishy conservative types who say that this is wonderful. It's actually a blessing of liberty to have perverts twerking for toddlers. And there's another group of conservatives who say, we really shouldn't permit this. The founding fathers are rolling over in their grave at the idea that this is a blessing of liberty, and we can actually say this is a bad thing. And what the squishier types will say is, well, look, if you ban drag queen story hour, then the left is going to tell us that we can't go to church on Sunday. And first of all, just as a practical matter, they already told us we couldn't go to church on Sunday for the better part of a year during the coronavirus lockdown, even as other institutions were allowed to remain open, like marijuana dispensaries. So practically, I think it's bogus. But furthermore, I think if we can't distinguish between twerking for kids and going to church, then what we're really saying is we have no faculties of reason, we have no moral conscience that we can rely on, and that's fine if that's what your view is. But then you have to admit that we have to give up self-government, because the whole premise of self-government is we actually can know things. We can kind of know the difference between right and wrong and true and false, and then we come together through our representatives and pass laws in accordance with that, in accordance with the way we want to live. So if we don't even grant the reality of moral conscience and reason, I guess what that really means is that we're going to just give up our politics, give up our self-government. And the left is not going to give that up, by the way, which is why they've been much, much more successful over recent decades.
But, there's some that might argue that the right has been really successful at using language to change the political debate. Let's talk for a moment about Frank Luntz. He's a pollster, a commentator. A lot of people have seen him on TV. Back in the 90s, he worked with Newt Gingrich and the contract with America. He really changed the way that Republicans speak. Here's some examples of Luntz's changes that changed our politics. Drilling for oil became exploring for energy. Undocumented workers, illegal aliens. A state tax replaced with death tax. Tax relief or tax cuts replaced with tax relief. I mean, haven't all of those changes really been effective for the right in terms of changing the political dialogue?
Well, both sides have their spin masters, so I'll certainly grant that the estate tax and the death tax convey different amounts of spin, or tax cuts and tax relief. But I want to take some issue with your example of undocumented workers versus illegal aliens. Because undocumented workers, it seems to me, is the sort of vague euphemism that actually distorts reality. Illegal aliens is just a relatively objective term. It would be like calling someone a foreign national, but you say an alien, or you point out that it's this person is violating the law.
Doesn't the word alien, by the nature of alien, remove somebody's humanity and makes it seem like they're from another planet? I mean, that's some of the criticism of that word.
No, we're not talking about E.T. The term alien has referred to foreigners for a very long time, and it's appeared in our laws for many centuries. And it doesn't just refer to one ethnicity or one nationality or anything like that. If people are thinking of E.T.s, it's because they're looking too much up in the sky at those recent Navy reports. The issue here with undocumented workers, or say, is one, it's about people who are more than just workers, but also I was an undocumented worker when I was 14 years old, right? When I was working in the sandwich shop, when I was a little too young to legally be doing that, I guess I was undocumented, but that's not really what we're talking about. When we talk about the immigration issue, we're talking about this problem of people who are foreign nationals, who are citizens of other countries, coming to this country in contravention of our laws and at the express desire maybe of elite politicians, but not of the majority of the American people. So I think we've got to be very specific. I think the clearest example of this, because yes, the right has won, say, on the pro-life issue. Right, that phrase, pro-life, I think puts the issue into stark relief, and it obviously benefits the rhetorical side for the conservatives. But to me, the perfect example of this is same-sex marriage. When I think of the same-sex marriage debate, I don't even want to call it a debate, because there never was really any debate. The romantic poet, Anthony Kennedy from the Supreme Court, invented this new right and redefined marriage. But even beyond that, the way that the proponents of same-sex marriage won the debate was by redefining the terms at the beginning. If there were, regardless of what you think about the issue, I think people can support the issue but still see this point. The question of marriage is always, what is marriage? Throughout history, everywhere in the world, until about 5 minutes ago, people thought sexual difference had something to do with marriage. And then the people who proposed same-sex marriage came along and they said, no, we think sexual difference doesn't have anything to do with marriage. Okay, well then you've got to have that debate. But what the proponents of same-sex marriage did from the very beginning, the Human Rights Campaign, another preposterously named organization, the one with the equal sign, they came out and they begged the question. They actually presumed their own conclusion. They said, we've already decided that marriage has nothing to do with sexual difference, and so now we're just going to ask who has the right to get married. Well, we all agree everybody ought to have their political rights. Nobody's suggesting taking political rights away from people, but we're evading the question. The question is, what is marriage? And the left, I believe, felt it couldn't win on those terms, so it very deftly manipulated language to win the debate before it ever took place.
Yeah, and there's a great new book by Sasha Eisenberg that's called The Engagement that delves into that issue as well. While we have you, I want to get a quick few takes on the news, because you're so often one of our panelists here on The Issue Is. President Trump holding a rally this weekend, heading to the border next week. He's been so effective at using language for political gain for himself. What do you make of his role in the Republican Party right now, and should he be the nominee in 2024?
He is an absolute poet, and I'm not even really joking too much about that. By using the phrase, "Make America Great Again," by using so many of his colorful phrases, he really understood how to weaponize language in a way that basically only the left usually does, and he did it very well. So what does that mean moving forward? It seems as though President Trump is going to run again. He's made a number of signals about this. This is really bad news for Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is doing a lot of great stuff in the Republican Party, and specifically in Florida, and he's running very much in the Trump lane. Even their body language and the way they speak seem to be similar, so that could pose a real problem for him, because I suspect Trump would have a lot of support. One imagines there will be a lot of other candidates in 2024 as well. I must say, though, I hesitate to make any predictions about 2024. I don't think anybody in 2013 would have predicted that Trump would be the nominee in 2016. And so there's a whole lot that can change moving forward. But I do think, regardless of whether it's Trump or someone else, they really need to learn from Trump. Trump recognized in 2016 that political correctness was the gravest threat to America, that the debates over words and pronouns even is not just an abstraction or a distraction, but that it actually carries with it all of these premises. You know, if you can redefine the pronouns, you're redefining the way we understand human nature, and the left is very, very good at that. So if we are going to have, you know, a nominee in 2024, whether it's Trump or someone else, I want them to be just as poetic as the Donald.
Of course, that most on the left would say that climate change is the greatest threat to human nature, and you probably would argue with that phrase at all. But let's go to this. Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, a Californian, at the border this week, something a lot of folks on the right had been asking her to do for some time, finally making that trip. Your takeaway, are you satisfied now that she's gone to the border?
I want Joe Biden to go to the border, and I think Joe Biden recognizes that the easiest way that he can avoid get out of this issue is by sending Kamala Harris. I think basically what Joe did was picked up Kamala and tossed her in front of this bus of this very difficult issue for them. So Kamala can go to the border, that's fine, but they really need to address the issue. The fact that we have upwards of 6,000 people pouring into this country every day is untenable. It's really bad for Democrats. I think the reason that they're not doing anything about it is because, one, the progressive base ideologically is on board with open borders, and the Democratic Party more broadly thinks that flooding the country with illegal aliens is going to give them an electoral advantage, either through a mass amnesty or through registering them to vote through laws like H.R. 1 or S. 1, or even just down the line generationally. That's what their bet is. But the problem they face is that the majority of Americans don't like these open borders, and this includes a huge number of Democrats as well. So Joe Biden realizes this is a lose-lose situation for him, which is why I think he's sending his number 2.
It is, and it's a complicated thing. We're trying to win the Latino vote, which could increasingly be up for grabs in the years ahead as well. All right, Michael, you know we like to play music on this show. So this week we want to play some music from you. I stumbled upon this online. This is video of you from last Christmas. What's going on here?
You know, we here at the Daily Wire, I think we're just spending too much time at the office. We're really going crazy. That is my friend and colleague, Jeremy Boring, head of the Daily Wire. You know, people say conservatives don't have culture. I think maybe we've got a little too much culture here at the Daily Wire. We got to dial it back.
That is one version of culture. We will talk gun control next, but first we leave you with Michael Knowles and this Christmas hit in the middle of summer. Take it away.